Hello everybody, welcome to our first live design stream of 2025. Lovely to have you all. Hello Karen, hello Deborah, hello Victor and hello Beth. Lovely to have you all. I think it's quite early in the morning for a lot of you, so good morning. I hope you're having a nice cup of coffee. Having my post-lunch coffee. And I'm also slightly late, apologies. I was trying a new recipe and it wasn't quite ready, and cake comes before YouTube lives. I'm very afraid, but I've got some beautiful coats to make up for my delay, so let's have a look at it. And I came across these recently on Pinterest. They're all from, I think, the Paris Museum of Design, and they're all 1950s carven and different sort of French couture houses, and I believe we're all haute couture coats. But what I love about these quite stylized drawings, that they really show off the design lines. Some of them leave a little bit up to imagination, like this coat. You sort of don't quite know how it's made, which is of course great if you want to draft your own. You can pick the bits you want and then turn it into something you want. This one was very popular on both Pinterest, both YouTube and Instagram. I put some polls out, and I understand why, because, well, the color is glorious, but also it's some very clever pattern cutting happening right here. And hello Pinky, and Karen is saying she's in New York. So yes, New York State. So yes, mid-morning, I think. Okay, this was another lovely coat. This is actually the first one I thought saw, and that sort of sent me down a rabbit hole because it's so beautiful. It's got really nice details. It's got something very clever happening there, where we don't quite know how it could work. So it'd be nice to analyze. And then finally we had that really beautiful beige sandy color, which again is really clever. They all have great names as well. So this is called a candy dat, and they have all these beautiful French mid-century details. You can just sort of imagine the top stitching on the coat, for example, and things like that. And what I love about them, they're all, apart from the red one, your classic topper coat style, swing coat. So you can either use a sewing pattern, you have it, or if you love designing your own patterns, then if you're one of my students, of course, there is actually a topper coat on the Vintage Masterclass, and there's also a whole video lesson all about volume, which sort of goes into that. And I think we also had a live Q&A about swing coats, and I will put that in the community because I know one of my students, Suzanne, is a big fan, and she made a beautiful swing coat, so we sort of covered that. So we're going to look at those. So they're all a swing coat base, and then you can add the details you want in the design lines. So that's what I like about them. So you can adapt them to what you want to make, whether that's a full-on vintage swing coat, whether you're making, you know, just like a nice oversized coat and you're looking for details, or whether you're making a jacket or even a top and you just want something pretty to add to. And hello Evita as well. And Evita is in love with the back too. And Pinky's got a question about coat construction as already. I might answer it towards the end when I'm talking about construction more, Pinky, because it's an interesting question about interlining and not spending too much money, which is always really important. So let's have a look at these coats. I'm going to switch over. And I've got good sound. If you joined Trisha and my YouTube live on Thursday, you know that technology is not always our friend. And we are just two sort of one women organizations. Everything you see is just us doing it by ourselves. So sometimes it's a little bit rustic. Like, for example, using another book to make sure I've got a flat drawing surface. What I will do as well, I will link the Pinterest folder where I saved them all to the description, so afterwards you can have a look. I haven't done it yet, but I will do, so you can have a look into that. And Evita is saying, wow, the color is continuous. Love the pattern for love to have the pattern for this. Yes, well, hopefully be able to draft it yourself. I think this one is probably, if you had a sewing pattern, it would really bamboozle you. If you just have a classic coat pattern already, whether it's a board sewing pattern or when you draft it, it's a really fun detail to add, which sort of combines a Peter Pan style collar or sailor collar with a yoke. So lots of great things. And Deborah, you're being very kind. She's saying, I really didn't mind the glitches. It was so informative. Yes, thank you. We had sound glitches, we had starting glitches, whatever you asking for, we had it. So, but we made it through. And I think you just have to, you can't take it too seriously, because otherwise you just think, oh, what have I done? You know. This is supposed to be, we're all supposed to enjoy ourselves and also learn at the same time. So this coat is called the Candy Dad. What I'm going to do is draw the basic outline and then add the sort of details, which are the collar and lines. So from the front, what you would start with is I think it's a dolman or grown on sleeve. It might actually be a gusset sleeve to get that really nice fit. So you would start with an oversized pattern, not fully oversized, but making your basic bodice big enough you can wear it on top of a jumper or something. And then you would also do your dolman sleeve construction. What we have at the front is a V-neck with a single button stand. So what you would draft is you would enlarge your block or use a sewing pattern. And plus the sleeve. So you want to get the fit right first. So that's your first step. Then you would of course do a grown on sleeve. I would use a gusset, the classic one. So it has a little sort of gusset here, which the reason I'm saying is because the sleeve isn't too oversized. So if it was a dolman sleeve, it would probably be wider to get the movement. So and it's also got a nice shoulder, so I would do a gusset. A little bit more work, but worth it for fitting. And lots of love for the collar. I agree, it's lovely. And yes, you would visually you can just, on that coat, you can just see the quality. It's going to be really nice wool. The top stitching is going to be really nice. It's going to have lots of sort of interlining, like a popper tailor construction. So you can just see it's going to be beautiful to wear. So that's what you start with, your block and your gusset. And then of course you also add volume to your overall coat. So the next step would be to add volume. And then I would actually try it on if you're drafting it from your block. If you have a sewing pattern, you can just make it up and then try it on, because I think with that collar the lines are so important. I'm going to draw on the back quickly as well, because the back and the front are really connected in this one. And that's what I love about all the designs from that sort of time, is that they really think about the whole design. It's not just the front and the back is like a, like a standard one. The designs always look at the back and the front and they look great. And they sort of really follow the body. So what we have that's our basic shape. So that'd be our silhouette, or our first step in designing or drafting. I'm going to add one more thing, but it has got a single button stand. And if you have any pattern which looks like that, you can literally use that as your starting point. But what we have then is basically a really oversized collar, which at the front has a little bit sort of starts at the shoulder. I'm going to try to draw it properly. It hits like this, and then it sort of doubles back on itself. Ooh, that's a tricky collar to draw. So collar looks something like this. What it has really nicely at the top of the shoulder, it's got a little, it's got a seam. I think so. Actually, it might not have a seam. It might just at the collar, at the high shoulder point, at the shoulder sort of top line, it might just have a little slit like that, or it might actually be a seam. The nice thing, if you do a seam, you can really shape it more beautifully. So I would probably do this a seam at the shoulder point, because it sort of goes past the shoulder point. So it goes past the sort of armhole point, which is why I would do a seam at that point. And then of course it goes back, and I think at the back it's got another little sort of dip. So you got these sort of dips at intervals, or little sort of cutouts, whatever you want to call them. Scallops maybe? Keyholes? But it basically again adds an extra bit of detail, having these sort of dips. So what is at the back, you would actually use a sailor collar construction or Peter Pan. You can also call it a flat collar construction. And again, the tutorials are on my complete pattern cutting school for that. Or you can use your own if you already know how to do it. And you would draft the whole collar like that. But then what's really clever is that the collar actually becomes part of the body. So we have the body like this, which is again why I think there is a seam at the shoulder, because otherwise you have a massive pattern piece. Because at the moment it's a pattern piece like this, which is not too big. If you add your collar on, you will first of all have a center back seam, which we don't have, and also be a really weird, really oversized pattern piece, which might also interfere with a straight of grain. So I would have a nice shoulder seam so you can shape this really nicely as it goes around. So what we basically have is a coat with like a high waist seam. It's like an empire waist seam. And then we have the under part like this, which of course goes up to here. And then it's also probably stitched into the sleeve. And then it probably goes down here. And then you know how we have a lovely top stitching? That's probably where it's all gets stitched together. Like this. So the undercoats of the upper part of your coat is overlapped by the lower part, which becomes the collar. So you have that sort of area here where we basically, I think there's a facing from this collar like this, maybe. And then I wouldn't be surprised if, because this collar is so big, so if this was a really fluffy wool, what you might actually do is, rather than having the collar made out of wool both sides, because it's never going to be worn up. It's always going to be worn down, isn't it? So you might actually have a facing and self fabric going all the way around, and then you might have the rest of the color done in lining. And again, at the front, if you do it in lining as well, or like a slippery fabric, it might be like a nice satin, that would help it sit really nicely. But you can see how you've got these layers, and I think the collar itself is completely separate, of course, at the back, and it's completely separate here. And then the upper part and the lower part of your coat just gets to stitch together along this line and along that line. And then what I think will happen at the back, because we have got this line going here, that we might actually have a high waist seam going across the back like this. It could even curve a bit. And then what they quite often do is that they add a center back seam to break up your back, so you don't end up with a really big, like a block at the back, which can make your back look a little bit big. Alternatively, you could just have a center back seam. It saves both fabric, but it also sort of breaks up that big piece of fabric, so it looks visually more interesting rather than just having a big sort of solid swing shape at the back. So you can see it is sort of complicated, but at the same time, all it is a swing coat with a waist seam and a collar, but the way they've basically overlaid it is what makes it really clever. So if you wanted to draft it, you draft just a plain swing coat, you draft a sailor or flat collar how you want it, so quite big and with a seam so you can curve it, so it probably goes past your shoulder and armhole seam, you know, probably by 5 centimeters or something, so you want it nicely shaped, but you draft that. And the only sort of more complicated bit is where you basically add a pattern piece here, where you sort of connect the lower part to the collar at the top. Apart from that, it's actually, the construction itself is just a classic coat, just turned really beautifully. And to finish it all off, what they've done beautifully is this sort of top stitching, and that top stitching can be used to hold everything together. So that's where the seams are actually sort of held together. So you can sort of imagine, trying to make it a little bit stronger, how the seams here can basically be used to stitch together your coat. And then all you do is you add a little cuff here, which I've made a little bit bigger so it looks sort of dramatic, and you would probably tack that maybe on your underarm point so it doesn't come down. And again, that has beautiful top stitching, and then it has again a little pocket with a pocket bag. Oh, and interestingly, you know how I said there's a single button stand? I just realized further down it actually becomes a double button stand. So I actually completely didn't look at it. I was too obsessed with the upper part. So what it actually is a much bigger overlap, like this properly. So when you have one button at the top, so it doesn't interfere with the rest, and then you actually have double buttons, which is always something which happens to me, where I get distracted by one thing and then I ignore other stuff. And it also looks like the buttons are closer together here, and then they go wider and wider, which is quite an interesting detail. So you can see there are lots of lovely things you could pick from this coat, whether it's just, you could do that sailor with sort of flat collar with a nice stitching. You could go all the way with having that sort of joined on collar piece, which becomes part of a coat. And what you basically, if you were making the whole thing, what you have is a front like this. So it's like a bolero at the top, and then the pattern piece underneath, your sort of extra coat, looks like this. And then it gets to stitch together along here and along there and along here and along there. And then what we basically just add to give you a nice 3D effect is the facing here, which means, and the facing probably goes like this, which means we can then also stitch them together underneath here. So it's like this is stitched invisibly all the way, but it gives you the really nice 3D effect. But you can see there are just 2 pattern pieces. There's just quite a few steps. So fun to try out. Let's have a look at the comments. Oh, hello Suzanne, lovely to have you. I was talking about your lovely swing collar earlier, swing coat earlier, and Karen loves this collar as well. Yes, this would be a perfect coat for a chilly day. And Pinky is saying, yeah, it looks a bit complicated. It does. I think a lot of these, what I love about the vintage designs is that they look really complicated. But if you do it step by step, it actually all comes together. They've just done something clever where they combined the collar and the bodice at the front. It's still just a flat sailor collar, which is one of the loveliest collars to learn to draft because it's so straightforward. And the seam, they just make it look incredibly complicated, you know, luxurious, very special. And hello Sandra, no worries about being late. Yeah, I know it's an odd time for you because it's like your sort of beginning of a working day, breakfast time. And thank you Pinky. And Karen says, I love that the collar and cuffs match. Yeah, I think it's that sort of cutout there with the stitching, same cutout here, and then also having a stitching at the pockets. That's what makes it all come together. And then of course I think if you had that seam, you would also maybe add the stitching here at the back, so everything is really pulled together and goes together. And one more comment from Deborah. Oh, she interpreted it completely differently, which I always love. I thought the front and collar was one piece with a middle seam at the back of a collar, a front sleeve, 2 back parts with grown on sleeves. So interesting. Oh yes, so I can see it. So you had separate sleeves, which could be because they're hidden, so you don't really know. And you would have gone the way where you had the collar going around. So again, you can interpret it as you want to, and you can actually draft it how you want to, what works better. I did a little bit of a cheat because I looked at there's a little drawing in the bottom right corner, which I think is a collar at the back. So I interpreted it, but it hasn't got a center back seam. But of course, that doesn't mean there can't be one. And hello, Simon, lovely to have you. Let's have a look at another collar. Okay, we've got quite. I might do a grey one next, and then how about we finish with, as a finale, the red one, because that is quite special. So the yellow one is the one I actually adore the color, because you probably know I love yellow. I find it really interesting because it's so abstract, because it looks like the collar grows out of the bodice, like, you know, yes, Galliano has done that quite a lot. And actually Alexander McQueen as well. I always get confused which one. I think it's Alexander McQueen did it quite a lot. And there's also, if you have the Pattern Magic books, there's the drafting method for that as well. But you basically have a collar which is part of your bodice, and the collar grows out of a dart. So you always think, oh yeah, that is pure Alexander McQueen. So it's fascinating seeing 1950s examples where it's been used. And I love on this one, I love the pocket as well, how that's been done in basically your seams, and then it's sort of kept separate with a button. So that's a beautiful coat as well, but it's quite abstract, so let's maybe leave it. Let's have a look at this one. This is abstract as well, but I thought it was very clever how it's done volume again. So like the last one, the theme here is really volume, which seems to grow out of nowhere. And I've got one more version of you for that. So you can see this is the actual sort of sketch, where we can see a little bit more detail if we need it. I'm going to put that in the Pinterest folder for you as well. So this is called the tapir. I think they are all carbon, but I might have misremembered it. I got very excited when I saw them. And tapir, I think, is just the name of the model. And I think they are all haute couture, so they are really constructed, beautifully tailored. So in this coat, we don't really know what the front looks like as much. And I quite like that maybe the front is quite simple. It looks like it's got a collar, a stand collar. I'm going to quickly go back to this one, trying to see what they've actually drawn there. Oh, this is quite... Because I'm always sort of used to having the front and then you interpret the back. So I'm actually going to draw the back first. And the back has got a really big stand collar. So again, we start with the construction as it is. And after Deborah said there might be a sleeve. Let's have a look. Oh, is there a sleeve? I think there is a sleeve. So this tapir collar starts with a stand collar. Then it's got a very sort of straightforward back. We got our shoulder. We got our armhole, like this. And then the oval shape is a typical sort of swing shape, which what's of mid-century is what you think of a proper winter coat. The front, I think, often if there's a big detail at the back, the front probably will be relatively straightforward. And it looks like it's sort of got a... basically an oversized stand collar which can be worn open. So she's actually wearing it open, but the collar itself, probably when it's closed, looks like that. Like this. And then it looks like it's got like a nice, it's like a two-part sleeve, like this. And it looks like the cuff has quite a nice, which I haven't got really space to draw. And the cuff looks like it's got a nice sort of slit there as well, and volume. And I would imagine the front might have pockets somewhere. Quite often they have, like, this is swing coat, they always have pockets like that. I would love to see the front. If any of you have seen it or find it in Pinterest, do let me know, because I couldn't spot it, because that'd be really interesting. So what's really interesting about the back is that we have this sort of amazing overlay. It looks what you normally on a trench coat, you've got, you know, like a sort of classic, what you think English, like a Burberry or aquascutum. You got often have this sort of flap at the back, and you have a button in the center. Probably all seen them. So instead of having a yoke, you sort of have an extra layer here, which I imagine originally was for extra rain protection. But they've turned it into like an amazing detail. Again, it looks really complicated, but what it is, get a nice color, is that if you wanted to do your own, you would trace over your back part and basically trace out the lines you want. And you might do that, we might draw on these lines on the actual twirl if you're having one, because you sort of want this one has to sort of hit around the maybe the upper hip line. And what I'm not quite sure is whether there's actually a side seam, because what it looks a little bit where it goes down, that could be a pocket. In this case, this actually might sort of be more like this, and then it might go to the front like this, then go towards the back again like this, and become a pocket, and then go like this. So your pocket is actually like this, which is a very odd drawing. So from the back, if we draw the coat from the back, what I think it might be a single piece coat. It's actually, it has got, from the drawing, it looks like it's got a center back seam. If you look at the illustration, it looks like we've drawn a line at the center back. But if this is your side seam, we basically have this sort of cape at the back, which then goes past with your side seam, becomes your pocket, and then goes like this again. So you could just literally just draw it on your pattern, and you just have to make sure you've got a pattern which has got a straight side seam, so you can lay them together. And then what you would basically have is your front bodice would look like this, and then your back bodice would look probably, I think it would come forward just trying, and then it would probably form the pocket flap and then go back again like this. So again, it looks really complicated, but all you're doing is, if you have your original front pattern like this, and then you have your original back pattern like this, you draw it on. We've got very small drawings, I apologize, and then you literally just trace over the two lines you want to establish. So that would be your front, and then your back again, you would have the same here, and then you probably have your stitch line here, and then it probably forms the pocket bag as well, and then probably goes up from there and gets stitched to the lining. But you can see it's actually, again, it is something which looks really complicated, but you actually just start with your basic coat and then you just lay it on top. And then again, this would be a fully lined coat, so the sort of seam where the back is, that probably would attach to the lining here, and then have another lining at the back. So you can see how they're very clever with how they replacing our basic seams with other stuff. But the method behind this is actually just laying your pattern pieces together and then drawing on your new lines. And then what is just clever is that, of course, it becomes separate. So it's only stitched together. I think it's stitched together here. Let's do it in another color. So it's stitched together again here with the top stitching, and then it is properly sort of attached through our pocket back here, but then everything else is sort of just separate, so it looks really luxurious, but is again just using like your cape from the back and extending it into a bigger pattern piece. So sort of pushing classic pattern cutting methods to its limits, and then again adding the top stitching. And then of course what you can do as well, because it looks like it got quite a lot of volume there, so if you wanted to, you could add a few sort of cut and slash lines here and add a bit of extra volume to the bottom edge. So you spread it out, and that's what gives it that sort of beautiful drapey effect. And if that sounds too complicated, how about you just make a really simple coat, but then instead of having our normal trench coat, you could just have it this volume, or you could have it shaped. So you could just pick the volumes you want, or you could just have a coat with a really nice pocket bag like that in the side seam. So all you could just decide is basically sort of move your side seam a bit around. Rather than having a straight side seam, you have a little bit of a zigzag side seam, but keep the rest as a classic coat. So you can see there's lots of design opportunities for it, whether you want the full-on statement coat or whether you just want to pick out one or two. So let's have a look at the questions. Beth Smith is asking what the benefits of having a 2-part or 3-part sleeves. And Karen is saying 2-part sleeves can be used for larger arms and movement. My tailoring instructor taught me how to adjust my jacket sleeves for that reason. So that's quite right, Karen. It's basically a 1-part sleeve is our basic sleeve. And then a 2-part sleeve is what we also call a tailored sleeve. And Beth, there's a tutorial on how to draft it on the website. And rather than our sleeve being straight, it basically allows us to have a sleeve which sort of moves more like this, because we've got, instead of 1 seam, we have 2 seams. So we can basically mold it slightly forward so it looks better when we wear it. And as Karen says, it has sort of more points because it's got double the seams where you can add extra room, for example, and more movement. So it's a really great one. And the 3-part sleeve is really what I've seen mostly either on hybrid sleeves. So for example, where you might have a tailored sleeve at the front and then your back might be a raglan sleeve, and then you would have a seam at the shoulder top as well. The other part where it's always used, or used a lot of the time, is of course the Chanel cardigan, or the cardigan jacket as people call it. So you know, the sort of very lightweight tweed jacket, this is beautifully tailored. And they've got, not always if you look through the history, but quite often they basically have a 2-part sleeve which gives you a beautiful tailoring fit. And then they also add an extra seam at the top. Again, you can then mold it a little bit more around the but it would be only up here. So you can basically have both the fabric eased in as you would have for a tailor sleeve anyway in wool, and then also having a seam, you could curve it as well. So you get a very nice shoulder line with a 3-piece sleeve, Beth. And then having that seam right at the top there means you have the focal point to put your buttons or trims on. You know how the Chanel cardigans, they always have a trim around the cuff, and then quite often they have buttons as well. And having that seam right at the top allows you to really show it off. And if you want to draft them, both the 2-piece sleeve and the 3-piece sleeve are on my pattern cutting school website, where you are of course a member of Beth. And we've got a question about the collar, which by Deborah, saying about how high would you do the collar. So let's go back to, actually that's, you probably don't even, I don't need to show you the image again, the paper again. I think it looks really high, so I would literally, it looks like it's sort of hitting her chin line nearly. So I would probably measure that. If you want to have like a normal crew neck, I would measure from that point upwards, because I've recently had to buy a sports jacket and all the collars this season are this high, so they hit you right here, which is really uncomfortable. So if you make your own, you can make it literally measure the distance, and that's how you draft it. If you look at the image, it looks like it's sort of hitting your hairline at the back, so it would be a really good starting point. And Pinky is saying, so are there darts hidden in the seam? The great thing is, Pinky, because this is a swing coat, so there's like probably no darts. It's a completely straight style, which makes styles like that really easy. Because if you had darts, for example, a bust dart, then it become a bit more complicated. So styles like that are really loose, which allows you to have real fun with the seam lines, because you don't really have to worry about, you know, rotating your dart and stuff. So it makes it much easier, because otherwise you would, if you wanted to have a dart at the front, for example, it would have to be rotated in the shoulder hole, into the armhole, because you couldn't have, for example, have it going to the side seam, so it would go into the armhole properly. But if you don't have a dart, things like that are a lot easier. So I would recommend skipping the dart if you can. If you want it more fitted, you can have it. It just means you have to think about your dart position when you're drawing all these out there style lines. Okay. Let's have a look at this beautiful 1950s haute couture coat, which just has everything going for it: volume, color, seams, clever pattern cutting, and I think the name is Cadiz, maybe? I'm not quite sure. And it might be from 1948, so late 40s, early 50s. And again, it's a French one. It is from the French Museum of Design, and again, I put the link to the Pinterest board in the description. What is really clever for this coat is that we've got a fitted front, and then we've got a voluminous back. And if you have something like that, where you have a fit at the front and then lots of volume at the back, that means something must be happening underneath, because otherwise, if you just cut the coat like that, all the volume at the back would sort of push it towards the front, and it would never stay fitted at the front. So what we actually have is a coat with a lovely grown on neckline as well, but we also have grown on sleeves, again, because this is a mid-century style. I would say this probably has a gusset. So the style is like this. I'm going to draw the basic fit first, and then later on draw in all the volume. But what we have is a style like that, and then the actual coat isn't actually that oversized down to our sort of dropped waist. It's very Givenchy, isn't it? I always think that that dropped waist is sort of reminds me of a Givenchy coat. I think it's probably sort of straight, maybe slightly like this. So slightly not fully fitted, but the shape is like that, which means at the back you will again have exactly the same shape, and you don't need to drop it. The back would be like this. And the reason I'm laying it out like this, because with a style like that, that's actually the actual shape of your coat, and then they've added lots of stuff on top of it. So what you would have is at the front, this is your actual coat. At the back, this becomes like your lining. So the lining, or like sometimes also instead of a lining, what they do is they use just a fitted panel, for example, like this. It doesn't even have to have the sleeves. So it might just be that there is like a fitted panel like that at the back, which then means is attached to our side seams at the front, which means you get that fitted look at the front, but then at the back, of course, it's hidden, and instead, typically I have no red pen. I want a bright red pen to show it to you, but we're going to use pink. What we have at the back instead, then, what's visible on the outside, is a really voluminous coat. So there's a big pleat, which goes all the way to the top, so there is a lot of volume, and then also of course lots of volume. So that's both a swing cut and also extra pleats, so lots of cuts and slash lines, lots of volume at the back. And then of course that continues round to the front, where we have this sort of, I think, all-in-one skirt, but is being held in place by having that panel or that sort of hole. Quite often I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't add a whole back, I would just add where you need it, which is probably like either the sort of bust to hip line section or going up to the shoulders. It's anchored, and you literally just have basically the back which fits this, which is like a semi-fitted block or coat pattern. You have that just as a layer inside, in between your outer and your lining, and you could make it out of a couture canvas or something. And so it does feel like it's fitted when you wear it. And I've got a few, it's a little bit like, weirdly enough, if you've seen these 1960s, 70s sort of beach caftan muumuus, they sometimes do it. And we sort of also they call it like a sack back dress, which again is fitted at the front, and then the back is really loose. And they're lovely to wear because it feels like a volume is really controlled. Because, you know, if you wear a proper kaftan, for example, it just seems to be so much volume everywhere. But with a style like that, the bodice sort of fits really nicely, and then you just got the volume where you want it. And if it was, for example, if you wanted like a contemporary version of this, if you wanted to sort of make a kaftan, all you do is at the front you have like a something like this stitched up, which is then on the, and your back is exactly the same as the front, and then this is just like an elastic waist on the inside, elasticated, which means the front gets held close to the body and the rest is really big. So you can see how the same sort of idea could be super elegant like this red coat, or it could be like a really relaxed summer style. So it's a really good idea. And fun as well, and much easier, because all you have to use is a coat pattern you like, which is sort of semi-fitted. So this is not skin tight, I think. This is sort of a nice fitted coat with a waist, so, you know, and it can have waistbands as well. And then you would literally just trace through the back part you want fitted, which is this bit, and then just add all your slash lines to the back and create all the volume. And of course they've combined it with these fancy sleeves and stuff, but you could just have simple sleeves, like satin sleeves, if you didn't want to have a gusset sleeve with all the volume. And then the next thing that they have as a beautiful detail is, which is why I hadn't drawn on the front yet. Interestingly, I think it's got a center front opening and then maybe some hook and eyes or something. And it's got a stand collar which is shaped by the look of it, and then sort of just meets at the front. And what they've done really nicely, I've actually drawn it wrong, I apologize. What they've done is that I think our bustard is like, this is quite hard to see. I think they've done like a hybrid bustard like this. So I would do this right underneath the bust, which means you have to do like a little bit of sort of hybrid pattern cutting. But it has these sort of dart lines here like that, which again is a really nice detail and sort of like just makes it a little bit more special. And of course the way it would actually look like when you wear it is that you have all this volume sort of coming out exactly like a sackback cloth. So lots of volume coming from the front, being contrasted with just this part fitted. And then what they've also done is they've done these slash lines here and added volume, and then just both and then pleated them in. So what we basically have is pleats like this, which because of gravity means the sleeve ends up looking like this, which again sort of plays with that you have like repeating lines. You have the curve of the sleeve, and then you have the sort of curve of your volume of the coat skirt coming together. So it's a really nice way of adding really clever volume. And if you wanted to draft this yourself, if you wanted just the bodice part, you would use a fitted coat pattern, and this is sort of it looks like an opera coat, or like it doesn't look like it's made out of a heavy wool. This could be made out of a lighter wool, it could even be made out of a cotton, or like a silk. I can imagine it being a really glamorous red silk on you. And in that case, you could have, you know, it would be worn on top of maybe a dress. So you would use a semi-fitted coat block. You would draw on your line here, and then you would use that point to trace around your back as well. Then what you would have to do is add all the volume to the back bodice and add the pleat and all that sort of stuff, and also add all the volume to the skirt part below the hip. If you wanted it lined, you would have to, what they might then, instead of having a panel at the back, it might just sort of be actually on next to your skin. So you actually add the lining with all the volume, because you can't have a fitted lining. And then it might actually, when it's sort of open, oh, this is going to be horrible to draw. But if this is the inside of your back coat, so what you would see, you would have it fully lined, and then on the side seam you might just have that sort of panel actually, which pulls everything together next, visible and just nicely finished. So that sort of depends on the construction. If it's the other option is to use this to just line, basically, if I draw it out, to just line this section, and then of course this section as well. They could be lined together because they're fitted, and then the skirt should just be, could be unlined with like a nice facing, which would make it much lighter as well for sort of spring. So you got quite a few options. And if you, with the sleeves as well, again, the lining, you wouldn't have the pleats, you would just add the slash lines, but then instead of having a pleats as well for the lining, it would literally be that shape. Because if you had the lining straight, it would just pull everything. Actually, I'm just thinking, if you had the lining straight, it would pull up that edge too much. So you'd have a lining curved, but without the pleats. So you can see with a coat like that, again, the starting point is straightforward. You have a fitted coat, you add nice start lines if you want, you add your seam, you add lots of volume. The magic happens by having a fitted back panel. So you can create a vintage inspired coat like that, or if it's too much, next time you make a simple kaftan, a top, a tunic, try out, instead of having it completely oversized, try out having some sort of panel or belt visible at the front, and then having an internal waistband. And of course it doesn't have to have anything visible at all. So if you could just have a really simple oversized tunic like that, which might maybe have seams down here, which I've seen before, and then to the seams you basically internally only attach an elastic band, which is the same measurement of your waist, and then you end up with a tunic which goes like this, invisibly, and then is all oversized. And I quite like having a channel for my elastic band at the front. But you can see how the same pattern cutting methods can be used for high 1950s fashion, or a quick fun project which still has that wow factor of a really oversized flowing back and big arms and a fitted front, so you still feel like you have a figure there. So let's have a look at your questions. And Karen saying that is so stylish, a special occasion there. Maybe a springtime look. Yeah, I think this is more springtime ones. We have one the proper winter. And I've missed a question. Deborah saying, oh, cool. So if you wear it, it feels like fitted. Yeah, that's what I like about this, because if you have something really oversized, sometimes it feels like a bit like you're lost in it. Same as the kaftan types, but by having bits of it fitted, it feels like the volume is really controlled where you want it rather than where you don't want it. And Deborah is saying, but the lining should be sturdy, right? Not like a normal lining. So yes, the back panel, that would be probably self fabric even. Or if you made this out of a silk, then you could actually use normal lining, and then maybe just at the back part, I would add like maybe a very lightweight canvas if you want to do it properly tailored, because you could do the front with like a really nice interlining as well to make it more sturdy and tailored. Or you could actually, tell you the truth, if you use a really good quality lining or slightly thicker lining, that'd probably be enough. It needs to be strong enough so it holds everything together, so it doesn't fray. But if you want to really lightweight, you could sort of use a silky, maybe a nice silk, or like a cupro, which we discussed in the last one, which is like a slightly better quality lining. And Suzanne is saying, so there we have internal structure that is the key to everything. Yes, and it's really simple because it's literally just that back panel. But if you hadn't had this back panel, because normally if you add volume, I'm wearing a swing coat, just more 60s than 50s. You always have the same volume at the front and the back. You might add like a pleat at the back for a bit more volume. But if you try to have this fitted here, so if I pattern cut it with a really fitted front and then added lots of volume at the back, all that happens is that the volume sort of gets pushed to the front because of gravity. The fabric wants to evenly settle around it, and if you have lots of volume at your center back, like you have with this coat, and then have a really fitted bodice to reflect it, all it's going to happen is the front is going to get pushed out like that because there's too much at the back. So it's always going to find the sort of the medium. It's not going to stay fitted, is it, if you have nothing to fit it to. And Karen is saying, yes, silk, satin or semi-shine material, or bright and light for spring type events. Yes, I think it's sort of, that's what you think for. I think in a really thick wool, it wouldn't really work. I could imagine that being in like a really amazing silk jacquard brocade as well, with maybe, a woven pattern as well. And Victor saying, thanks again, that coat, so interesting. You're welcome. I saw it as well. That's really clever. And again, it's sort of, when you look at more contemporary designers, you can see them sort of repeating these ideas. So it's always really interesting to see where it comes from. And again, this is sort of Charles James, you can imagine doing stuff like that. But I love how ideas are interpreted again and again. So we had a look at the 3 colours. What I had at the beginning is a question by Minky about interlining. So she's got a flannel for a coat which isn't quite thick enough. So she wants to interline it and she doesn't want it to cost a fortune. So of course, if you use proper, like a couture canvas, that gets quite expensive. Depending on the flannel, which I mentioned is a wool flannel, you could, it depends what, let's see whether, are you in the chat, Minky? Before I answer the question, this is always the YouTube delay. Are you thinking of making a swing coat? Because if you're making a fitted coat, you can find like cheap alternatives to canvas. So it's sort of, the best thing is to go into a shop and you sort of know what to canvas, which is basically just lightweight and quite sturdy. But you can replace it with, something which has the same sort of structures. So you don't want anything too sturdy. But you can, even if you have to, when you make like quick projects, you can just look through your shelf and think, oh, this is roughly which give me the body I need. You could use something like a really thin wadding as well. You could use a really nice woven interfacing. That's sort of maybe £8 a meter, so it's not cheap. This is UK prices, but they're not too expensive. So lightweight Wileen interfacing, which can be sewn, and you could just literally interline the whole thing with that, and it'd be a lot cheaper than proper tailoring interlining. It depends what you want the coat to look like as well, whether you want it to look more tailored, sort of, if a flannel is too soft and collapses, then you want to use something like a woven interlining, like a Wileen one, or even like a woven. If you want to experiment, you can try a polycotton. Like you have like a thin one, which sounds completely wrong, but it has the slipperiness compared to cotton, and that will just give you a little bit of extra body. If you want it to look like it's thicker and more woolly and more luxurious, then you might have to look at something like a sort of fluffy interlining. So it would be like a thin wadding. Again, you can buy interfacing, which has that sort of slight woolly factor, which again isn't too expensive because it's interlining. So you have to sort of really think about what it is. And then I would probably flatline the pieces. So you literally stitch on the flannel and whatever you interline this together, and then you treat it as a single piece. So again, if you actually wanted to have a little more body, you could use like a viscose, like a drapey viscose crepe de chine, which sounds all wrong, but it has that softness. It has this sort of drape, and then if you underline it, it just has a little bit more body. So there's lots of different ways to try out. Even going just through, if you have like a fabric stash, go through it and lay on top of different fabrics, because you don't have, imagine you're making a coat for yourself, so you don't have to go into production, say, yeah, this is proper, this is couture canvas or lining or exactly this type of iron-on interlining, because you have to reproduce 80 times. You can use remnants you have, which might not be interlining or facing or lining fabrics. If they work, use them. These are sort of in industry, or if you use a sewing book, they give you rules because they work all the time. But if you're making stuff for yourself, you can experiment. So I've used lots of different things for interlining. When you're making a project and you want to spend more money, or if it's sort of for yourself, experiment and try it out and see what works as well for that. If you could try, if you have a fleece fabric even, which sounds really weird, but that has that lightweight fluffiness, if you layer it on top of that, flat mount it, and then I would fully line it so it slides really nicely and looks expensive, but try it out. That probably will work and make it really warm as well. But the nice thing is you can just do a little sample, see that it sits nicely. If it doesn't work, if it droops, try something else. And let's finish off with the comments. Karen is saying it needs a nice pillbox hat. Yes, it does with style. It needs like a little small hat, doesn't it? And maybe even it could be, something round pillbox. Actually, because it has that nice stand collar, Karen, a pillbox would be perfect. This looks, it's quite interesting because it's late 40s, but that sort of neckline always makes me think of the 60s, even like, Audrey Hepburn even, or it's Jackie Kennedy, isn't it? That's what it could be. And when Karen is saying, I like the jacket that you have on, Charlotta. I love the collar and large cover button. Thank you very much. It's from the last company I worked for full-time as a designer. And it was a French-English company, so which is why I love the 1950s as well, because that was always our inspiration. This is more 60s, but it's a knit fabric, so it's fully knitted. So it's like tailored, but made out of knit fabric. So it's like a house coat, but you can wear it out and look smart. So I absolutely love it. And again, can you see it has the top stitching? Is it top stitching? No, this is binding, because because this is knit, we always either used to bind our collars. So if I show you, it looks like the stitching on this coat, doesn't it? But it's actually binding because it's knit. So what I think, if you would make this out of a knitted, like you could make it out of a double, like a Roman, like a pointy or something, like a double knit, and then you would have to buy ribbing the same color, and you literally bind your collars, and it looks makes it look really finished, and you can use the same on the pockets and stuff like that. It's a really nice finish off. And Deborah saying, did you do the buttonholes on your coat by hand? My machine doesn't do big buttonholes. These are made in China, because we used to produce our knitwear in China. So this is knitted, Deborah. So actually they're not that great. So we just, sorry, can you see if I hold it? Can you see there a bit? I think big buttonholes always become a little bit wobbly on coats. Let me see if I can show you. Can you see? It's not a very nice buttonhole, which is why if you had open, I think that always let down the coat a little bit. But this was an expensive coat. But if you did hand-bound buttonholes, that would push the cost up even more. And it's always amazing, because with buttonholes, nice buttons, for example, can add like £20 to the cost of your final garment, even, because it's like so expensive, which is always surprising. So they're not perfect, Deborah. If you made it if I made this in a woven fabric, I would probably do a bound buttonhole with something like that big, because you can make that beautifully, or hand finish, as you say, because machines is just always going to have that packet look, doesn't it? And Susanna is saying you can do wonders for interlining. Yes, interlining is, well, that's why Trisha and I did a whole live on inner construction, because interlining, fusing, flatlining, it can elevate something, a really thin fabric, and completely change the qualities. So I absolutely love it. Yeah. And for styles like this, all of these, you can, this coat, for example, we've got up now, the beige, if your fabric is too thin, again, you would flat mount the whole thing on another layer of fabric to give it the body you need, so you can sort of really change it. And because lovely wool would be very expensive, so you can use a alternative fabric, and then you can experiment with it, and don't feel too guilty about using incredibly expensive fabric, and don't worry too much, which is what I love about it. So it gives you a bit more freedom using nice interlining. Anyways, thank you so much, everybody, for joining me for this live analysis. I'll be back next Thursday, when I'm having a week off, and then I might be back on Thursdays, or I might be back on Fridays, because I'm teaching more in real life, and one of the courses will be hopefully on Thursday mornings, which means by 1 o'clock I'll be completely talked out. So I might have to change the day, but I'm hoping to make our lives a regular thing. And I will also actually crop the actual analysis, and I will put them on YouTube as proper videos, because they really don't like our live streams, but I love them, hence I do them. But thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for your questions and comments. It's always nice to hear what you are thinking. To enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.